Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of The People's Report, News for the Left, brought to you by Solidarity TV. Today is December 10th, 2025. Why are billionaires calling for public executions? How is France still messing up Southeast Asia? How does the FDA keep us safe from allergens and illnesses? If you have unused warehouses in your neighborhood, would you accept ICE turning them into concentration camps? Do you think trans people should be raped in prison? Would you settle for one streaming service if it was owned by Trump and Saudi Arabia? Is the Israeli yellow line turning into a new apartheid wall? How is the Trump family involved in war profiteering? All these topics and more in tonight's episode of The People's Report. Timestamps in the episode description.
Well, don't feel so devastated if you're feeling alienated, because it turns out you're not alone. Just open up your heart, let the revolution start, and grab that megaphone. Solidarity, solidarity, I need you and you need me. Solidarity, 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 solidarity.
Billionaire Palantir co-founder calls for a return of public hangings to show masculine leadership in America. December 8th, 2025, via The Independent. Quote, "If I'm in charge later, we won't just have the three strikes law. We will quickly try and hang men after 3 violent crimes, and yes, we will do it in public to deter others." Joe Lonsdale wrote this on Twitter. The billionaire co-founder of the software company Palantir has called for the return of public hangings in order to demonstrate masculine leadership. Quote, "Our society needs balance. It's time to bring back masculine leadership to protect our most vulnerable." Lonsdale, who co-founded the tech giant along with entrepreneurs including Peter Thiel, made the comments in response to online criticisms of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and his attitude towards recent military strikes against alleged drug boats. Hegseth was called out for his own posts, in which he boasted openly about sinking, quote, "another narco boat." Online users reacted with outrage. Lonsdale replied, "Leftist schoolmarm leaders cause violence and evil in our civilization. Sinking narco boats publicly helps deter others, as does hanging violent repeat criminals. Killing bad guys is the Department of War's job. He should brag more. Masculine truth, bold, virtuous men deter evil." Hegseth is locked in an ongoing controversy over airstrikes on alleged drug smuggling boats in the Caribbean and the Pacific Ocean, which have killed at least 80 people. The Defense Department, also known as the Department of War, has not produced evidence to back its claims that the people it is targeting are in fact drug smugglers heading to the United States. The issue escalated last week after revelations that 2 survivors from the first airstrike on September 2nd had been deliberately killed by a second airstrike. Hegseth and President Donald Trump both pointed to the admiral in charge of the operation as being responsible, although they said he had acted within his authority. Critics have suggested the administration may be guilty of a war crime. The last person publicly executed in the United States was Rainey Bethia, who was hanged in Owensboro, Kentucky on August 14, 1936, in front of a crowd of about 15,000 people. He had confessed to raping and murdering a 70-year-old woman. The media circus around the execution and its botched circumstances, the volunteer hangman was said to be drunk, contributed to a decision not to hold any more hangings in public. Lonsdale, a U.S. entrepreneur and venture capitalist, is valued at around $3.6 billion, according to Forbes. He also co-founded companies including Adapar, OpenGov, and 8VC, having started his career as an intern at PayPal, whose founders included Thiel and Elon Musk. Honestly, I don't even know where to begin with this article, but I'll start from the very beginning. "If I'm in charge later," is how he opens this. If I'm in charge later, how does he expect to be in charge? Now, obviously, to an extent, he already is in charge. The United States is not run by the people. It is not really a democracy. It is not a republic. It is an oligarchy that is entirely run at the behest of and for the benefit for the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, the billionaires, and their class. So, to an extent, Joe Lonsdale is in charge. But, this is a more behind the scenes. Overtly, he is talking overtly. If he is overtly in charge, he's going to bring back public hangings. First of all, who's asking for this? I know that the chuds are asking for this. They've been wanting public executions forever. They think it's cool and hard or whatever. Because, of course, modern American society is so distant from death that the idea of death and killing is anomalous. It isn't real to most Americans. And it's why we're so comfortable with mass murdering people in the Middle East, or just blowing up random boats in the Caribbean or the Pacific, murdering people with military weapons, because to us it's not real. Death isn't a real thing. Killing people isn't a real thing. It's something that happens elsewhere so far away that we don't actually have to think about it. And it's become so normalized in our society to kill people from a distance, people that we don't know, strangers that we don't have to actually see or engage with, that the idea of killing them up close is, again, so amorphous of an idea that we don't really have to contend with it. But also, remember, the ruling class does not see us, the working class, as equal to them. Not in terms of value, not in terms of interest, and not even in terms of worth. Philosophically, materially, etc. The ruling class sees themselves as above us, much like the police see us as being beneath them, as being lowlifes, criminals, less intelligent, etc. The billionaires literally do not see the working class as being as valuable as them. So in their minds, the murder or execution of working class members of the public is no less unacceptable to them as killing a cow for a hamburger or blowing up foreigners for imperial super profits. And on that note, the idea that the US government can get away with murdering people at random for no reason with very little justification is not a new one. And certainly not any more new than billionaires killing working class people for imagined slights. The United States has been killing people extrajudiciously for as long as it's been around. Stemming all the way back to the murder of indigenous peoples in North America, to the murders of Mexican people in Texas and then in Mexico proper. Well, it was Mexico back in Texas too, but you know what I mean. And afterwards as well, the mass murder of Mexican people in Texas in the 1900s. And then, to the Middle East, to all across the Caribbean, in Africa, in Europe, in Indonesia, etc., etc., etc. We kill wherever we go. It's our MO. It's the way that American life exists. All of our privilege, all of our comfort exists and comes to us by the way of exploitation, which involves murder, whether it be the murdering of the working class here at home at the behest of billionaires, like gunning down, striking coal miners at, pretty much everywhere there's a coal mine strike, to blowing up Iraqis and for imperial super profits, again, for oil money, for the Vice President Dick Cheney. So all of this is not new. The only thing that's new is both how overt and brash it is, with these billionaires feeling comfortable and feeling safe, saying, hey, we should kill more people, and we should do it for sport and for entertainment, and the military-industrial complex and the military rulers saying, hey, we're just going to kill people. We're just going to kill them, and we're going to double tap them to make sure that they're dead, and there's nothing you can do about it. Previously, it would have been held with a little bit more decorum, as Obama did when he bulldozed Libya, bombed Yemen, bombed Syria, bombed Iraq, bombed Afghanistan, probably some other countries that I missed. When the United States continues to embargo and choke off Cuba for daring to overthrow the U.S. imperial order there, etc., etc. Now, the other thing that I want to take a brief moment to talk about here is his idea of masculinity. And this idea that, let's see what he says specifically, to demonstrate masculine leadership. We need to bring back masculine leadership to protect our most vulnerable. I'm not going to get too much into the weeds into what is or isn't masculinity or whatever. But the idea that killing people to set an example, first of all, works is bullshit. Punishment does not deter crime. Crime is the offspring of poverty almost all the time. What deters crime is incentivizing people not committing crimes. When people are facing punishment and increased punishment for committing crimes, they're going to be more likely to try to resist being caught, which means that people are going to be more violent in escapes. They're going to be more secretive, et cetera, et cetera. I feel like you can fill in the blanks with your own imagination over what someone might do if they are more worried about punishment, because they're going to commit the crime regardless. If, under the same circumstances, under the same material circumstances, what really deters crime is actually fighting poverty and giving people other alternative choices that are just as or more profitable, more rewarding than what the crime itself offers. So right off the bat, the punishment does not deter crime. Punishment deters people from getting caught. They're still going to do it. But the idea that violence is inherently a masculine activity is, just goes back to the classic toxic masculinity. The idea that men are supposed to be hard and violent and aggressive, and that the fact that we have drifted away from this overt violence in everyday society is, by default, feminine. It just really undermines everything that, being masculine or being feminine stands, I don't want to say stands for exactly, like it's an ideology, but it really poisons young people into thinking, both men into thinking that they should be violent and aggressive in order to prove themselves as being men, and it teaches women that to accept violence from men as being their default state, and to be fearful and reluctant to engage with men because they expect men to be violent. So violence is not masculine. Violence is not hard or tough, and you don't prove yourself as a man by going out and hurting people. You want to prove yourself as a man, I don't know, get organized, join a union if you can, and prove yourself as a human being of value. Because everyone has inherent value. You just have to go out and discover it for yourself. The key fact of life, the key goal in life, is not to prove to yourself one is a man or one is a woman or one is something other, because that's an innate part of your reality, of your personhood. It can't be taken away, and it can't be given away, and it can't be changed. It's fundamental. But the key part is that you want to live your life so that when you die, you can look back and say that you've spent all your life, your whole life, all your time, all of your energy fighting the good fight, fighting the struggle, the only struggle that matters, and that is the struggle to liberate all of mankind. Hey, if you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. Thailand launches airstrikes on Cambodia as Trump's peace agreement hangs in the balance. December 8, 2025, via CNN. Thailand launched airstrikes against Cambodia on Monday as a new wave of fighting erupted between the Southeast Asian neighbors, leaving a peace plan presided over by U.S. President Donald Trump just 2 months ago in danger of collapse. Both sides accused the other of launching strikes along their disputed border in the early morning hours, after weeks of simmering tension and the earlier suspension of progress on the ceasefire agreement by Thailand. The two nations have repeatedly fought brief border skirmishes in recent decades, with a deadly 5-day conflict in July leaving dozens dead and displacing about 200,000 on both sides of the frontier. Thailand's Prime Minister Anutin Charnvirakul said the country never wished to see violence, but would not allow the violation of its sovereignty. Additional military action would be decided according to the conditions of the situation, he said, in apparent reference to further aggression from Cambodia. Thailand's Foreign Minister Sihasak Phuangketkeow told CNN later on Monday that military action would continue until we feel that sovereignty and territorial integrity are not challenged. Asked by CNN if Thailand was planning to discuss the latest border clashes with Trump, Sihasak said that it is up to Cambodia and Thailand to work things out. We're not really convinced that the joint peace declaration is working according to its intention, he said in a sit-down interview. I think this is something that we have to work out with Cambodia. Cambodia's defense ministry condemned the Thai strikes, insisting it remained committed to implementing the previous ceasefire. A senior U.S. administration official told CNN Monday that President Trump is committed to the continued cessation of violence and expects the governments of Cambodia and Thailand to fully honor their commitments to end this conflict. The two countries share a 500-mile or 800-kilometer land border, and the territorial dispute over demarcated portions of it largely stems from a map drawn up by the French when they controlled Cambodia as a colony, which Thailand does not accept. To me, the end of this article is perhaps the most interesting part of the story, that France drew these colonial borders back when it occupied Southeast Asia, back when it called it French Indochina, and they owned Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And they drew borders to split up Southeast Asia into zones for its own economic benefit. And grappling with those borders today is what's leading to the conflict, or one of the main drivers behind the conflict between Cambodia and Thailand. French Indochina has had a very interesting history, and one that has been profound for the United States in particular, with, of course, the Vietnam War. Vietnam's war of liberation from its imperial occupations. Vietnam has had a very successful military career in the last century. Unfortunately, they've had to, but they threw out Japan, they threw out France, they threw out the United States and friends, they threw out Cambodia, and they threw out China, all in the course of about less than 50 years, from started in 1939, I think, to 1979. So, and Cambodia is one that the most people, I don't think, really think about, but probably you are familiar, at least nominally, with the Khmer Rouge and the Cambodian genocide, in which Pol Pot, the leader of the Khmer Rouge, a communist in name only, decides to reform Cambodia into a relic of its own past, and decides to rebuild the Khmer state, the old Khmer kingdom, and through immense violence turns the state of Cambodia from what used to be a French colony into, I don't even know how to put it into words, truthfully, a totalitarian dictatorship, with great amount of violent oppression against Cambodian Muslims, against ethnic Vietnamese, I believe against the Hmong people, and numerous other minority groups in the country, in order to make it pure for Cambodians. And eventually the Khmer Rouge were put down by Vietnam. The Vietnamese, fresh off their victory against the United States, are tired of Cambodia invading Vietnam and murdering Vietnamese people both in and out of the country of Vietnam. And so they depose the Khmer Rouge, who escape to the mountains and kind of just live on the border of Thailand. And this is kind of where a lot of the early struggle between Cambodia and Thailand starts, is with the Khmer Rouge. What a lot of people remember about this period of Cambodian history is that Pol Pot, who looks an awful lot like Elon Musk, if Elon Musk were Asian, he would look like Pol Pot. I'm not even joking. Look it up. It's crazy. But Pol Pot, Cambodian communist, launches the genocide, kills a bunch of people. And what a lot of people don't remember is that the Cambodian genocide is stopped by communists. It's the Vietnamese communists who end the genocide. And that Pol Pot's big backer was the United States. The United States sponsored this so-called communist dictatorship in order to profligate its war against Vietnam and to destabilize Southeast Asia and stop and poison the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. Thailand has long been a strong U.S. military ally. A lot of American military people were stationed in Thailand during the Vietnam War. I went there for rest and rehabilitation before going home. And so the conflict between Thailand and Cambodia now really is a legacy of imperialism, not just because the borders were drawn by France, but because the struggles were built by U.S. foreign intervention. Oddly enough, Cambodia is now one of 2 countries that sponsor or that hold a Chinese military overseas base, which, given that Thailand has American ones, it's certainly no confusion there as to why Thailand and Cambodia still have these struggles. And really, really interesting period of history to understand. Unfortunately, I'm not a huge expert on Thailand, or on Cambodia, but certainly not on Thailand either. So I can't go into great detail about how Thailand came to its situation, the way I can offer more detail about Cambodia. But the world and Southeast Asia deserve better than imperialism and better than these colonial legacies that only continue to prop up violence and strife between peoples who should not be enemies. No proletarian in Thailand is the enemy of a proletarian in Cambodia, nor the other way around. It is always the ruling class that sponsors and drives these conflicts. And right now, the global hegemon that oversees the ruling class is, of course, the United States. So we have to start asking ourselves, what is the United States doing in Thailand? What is the United States doing in Southeast Asia? What have we been doing over the last 100 years to make Southeast Asia and formerly French Indochina an unsafe and violent place to be? The United States killed 5 million people in Southeast Asia during the so-called Vietnam War, in which we killed and which we murdered en masse Vietnamese people, Cambodians, and Laotians. So, plus, the variety of ethnic groups that I have counted in those states as citizens of those states. If you want to know more specifically about the history of Thailand, I recommend Blowback, the podcast. I believe it's season 5 that covered Cambodia. Just wrapped up recently. Very, very, very strong series, very well researched, and will pretty much cover the history of Cambodia from the French legacy up until the modern era. Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization, and that means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. FDA elevates recall of 64,800 pounds of butter to second highest warning level, August 2, 2025, via People. A recent nationwide butter recall has been escalated by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, to a higher risk level. The FDA raised the risk of classification for the recall of one of Bunge North America Incorporated's butter products to Class 2, second highest warning level, on Wednesday, July 30th. A Class 2 recall indicates a situation in which use of or exposure to a violative product may cause temporary or medically reversible adverse health consequences, or where the probability of serious adverse health consequences is remote, according to the FDA's website. Bunge, which is based in Chesterfield, Missouri, initially announced a voluntary recall of 64,800 pounds of its European-style butter blend 1-pound product on July 14th due to undeclared milk, which was not listed on the product label. The company said the butter was packaged in white cardboard cases with 36 blocks to a case, and sent to a dozen distribution centers throughout the U.S. and one distribution center in the Dominican Republic. The FDA did not say whether anyone has been affected in connection with the recall. Bunge North America Incorporated did not immediately respond to People's request for comment on August 2nd. Milk is listed as one of the 9 major food allergens in the FDA's website. The FDA said food-related allergic reactions can vary in severity and include mild symptoms, such as hives, face and lip swelling, vomiting, coughing, or swelling. However, people may also get more severe reactions like anaphylaxis, which cause the immune system to release a flood of chemicals that can cause a person to go into shock and can be fatal, per the Mayo Clinic. The FDA said that because of this, it enforces regulations to require companies to list ingredients on packaged foods and beverages. The agency added that there are more specific labeling requirements for foods that can cause allergies or other hypersensitivity reactions. The FDA advised that if anyone who eats the affected products begins to experience any allergy symptoms, they should stop eating the food immediately, evaluate the need to use emergency medications such as epinephrine, and seek medical attention. Other major food allergens listed by the FDA include eggs, fish, crustacean shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, soybeans, and sesame. So a little clarification on what exactly this article is, or is describing, is that, based on my understanding, the company, I almost said published, released a whole bunch of butter product into various parts of the United States and the Dominican Republic, but did not include that was safe to consume, but did not include that milk was an ingredient. Now, I know that right off the rip, a couple of you guys are probably thinking, well, obviously butter contains milk. And yeah, I feel like that's relatively safe to assume. But what the FDA is supposed to do, and this is an example of the FDA doing what it's supposed to do, is it makes sure that food is not just safe to consume, but that people know what they are consuming when they consume it. And I know, oftentimes you'll look at a list of ingredients and you'll see things you have no idea what it is or what it does. One that comes to mind might be like soy lecithin or something like that, you see it on I don't know what that is. But the FDA makes sure that that is on the list. Because if you have, say, a soy allergy, you might need to know that the product contains that. And it's really important that people know what it is that they are ingesting, at least to the best of their research ability. So when a product that is butter, that we all know is made with milk, is released to the public, it has to tell the public that it has milk in it. There are plenty of butter substitutes that don't contain milk, right? So people who have dairy allergies or who might be vegan are going to be looking for milk that doesn't, or for butter that doesn't have milk in it. Because, and like the article says, milk is an allergen, and people who have milk allergies can either have, really minor irritation or straight up anaphylaxis. I know a person who cannot be in a room if you open a bag of Doritos or Cheetos, because the milk in the cheese powder in the air will send them into anaphylactic shock. So, we have to be careful about stuff like that for our friends and our comrades and neighbors in general who may or may not be sensitive to certain products. But we also have to know enough to be sensitive to their needs. If someone with a severe milk allergy were looking for a butter substitute and they found this one that does not say it contains milk, they would be justified in assuming that it is safe for them to consume, and it wouldn't be. So the FDA is supposed to play a very, very important role here in making sure that we know what it is we're eating to keep ourselves safe and to keep our friends, neighbors, comrades, etc. healthy and safe. And even when it seems obvious, you'll get a bottle of milk that says contains milk, or peanut butter says warning, product may contain peanuts. It's like, yeah, of course. But, those labels are there so that way people know to be safe. And if the FDA is not allowed to do its job, if it's getting cuts, if it is removed altogether, if it is not given the funding that it needs to ensure its job, we may start to see more and more and more people ingesting food that they have allergies to, because no one is going to be checking that the ingredients list on butter has milk listed. So, we saw a week or two ago that there was cheese being released with metal fragments in it. That's something that the FDA is supposed to prevent. And we can see that this is something that when the FDA is on top, with the butter, we can see when the FDA is doing their job, they can protect people from getting sick, protect people from getting illnesses or allergic reactions, even on things that at first glance might seem pretty obvious to the rest of us. But when they're not allowed to do their job, or when their job performance is interfered with by a government that is anti-regulation, by a government that serves corporate interests instead of the people's interests, and wants to save money by reducing the protections for the people, then we'll start to see things like metal shavings in cheese, or butter that we think is non-dairy and is making people sick. So these are some of the important functions of our federal government that might be often overlooked, but are still really, really important for public health and for keeping you and I safe, happy, and healthy, to allow us to live safer, happier, and healthy lives. Did you know the People's Report is produced for audio and video platforms? Stay informed by subscribing to us on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. ICE is expanding its detention capacity December 3, 2025 via the Jacobin. Immigration and Customs Enforcement signed a $30 million contract last week that moves to convert vacant warehouses into mega detention centers, increasing capacity in the Trump administration's push to supercharge deportations. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, may be moving forward with its reported plans to buy up vacant Amazon-style warehouses to create mega detention centers, new procurement records reviewed by the Lever reveal. On Friday, the agency inked a new $29.9 million contract for concept design for processing centers and mega centers throughout the United States. This document appears to be the first step towards realizing the agency's alleged plans to retrofit warehouse space as detention facilities for immigrants in its custody, development that NBC reported last month, citing internal agency sources. The mega detention centers, utilizing warehouse space, could theoretically be more than twice as large as ICE's current detention centers on average, per the NBC report. Already, ICE maintains a vast network of hundreds of detention centers across the country, most privately operated, which currently hold around 65,000 people. These facilities range from small temporary holding sites to prisons that jail hundreds of people. ICE is committed to safe, secure, and humane environments for all those in its custody, an ICE spokesperson wrote in a statement to The Lever. The agency constantly evaluates its detention needs and contract structures based on operational needs. In its ongoing effort to supercharge deportations, the Trump administration has activated dozens of new facilities to hold detainees and floated a variety of novel tactics to track down immigrants, including hiring private bounty hunters, as The Lever has reported. A central goal is expanding detention capacity, which the agency is set on doubling to 100,000 detainees by the end of the year. ICE has billions at its disposal as it expands, thanks to the unprecedented multi-billion-dollar windfall the agency received from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, GOP mega bill earlier this year, which nearly tripled its annual budget. That has meant bonanzas, in turn, for the federal contractors who work within the agency. In recent months, a new cottage industry of vendors seeking to get a cut of ICE's massive slush fund has blossomed. The vendor contracted to dream up ICE's mega center plans, KPB Services LLC, has a minimal digital footprint, but the Kansas address associated with the contract notice is in the same as federal contractor Mill Creek, which advertises project management and design work for the Department of Defense, among other government agencies. The company's vice president did not respond to inquiries from The Lever on Monday. The plans to acquire industrial space and transform it into migrant jails capitalize on a warehouse vacancy rate that has surged over the last 2 years, and remained high in part due to Donald Trump's tariffs, which introduced economic uncertainty that stifled industrial real estate demand, some analysts argue. Now that real estate may fall into ICE's hands. Now, I'm not suggesting conspiracy here. It is very convenient that the Trump administration's wild tariffs have resulted in numerous empty warehouses that are now open for grabs from ICE to turn them into detention centers. They're using the tariff money to bail out so-called farmers, who of course we know are farm owners, not farm workers, from their crops being destroyed, so-called destroyed, by tariffs and China buying other soybeans from other people, Instead of course, turning those soybeans into food, cheap, affordable food for the American public, they're whining about their profits or whatever. So the tariffs are being used to bail them out, and then also now we're seeing empty warehouses that are to be turned into concentration camps. Awfully convenient for the Trump regime, whose priority has always been the oppression of the public and the working class, but especially people of color and particularly Hispanic immigrants. It is, again, no stretch of the imagination to call these concentration camps. It is to create and foster the ethnic cleansing of American society and remove non-white persons, especially, or at least for the time being, especially Hispanic people from our civilization, as civilized as the United States pretends to be. So these warehouses being turned into, again, concentration camps, it's what they have to be called, is not surprising in any means. The government wants, of course, giant prisons, and they don't want to pay to build them, which is why they subcontract them out to private prisons all the time, which a lot of these are going to be. They're going to be private prison systems, private concentration camp. And if you thought government-run concentration camps were bad, wait until you see concentration camps and ethnic cleansing privatized. This is going to be unlike anything we've seen before in the United States, most likely. So these warehouses that are probably in your community and used to be used for storing and delivering goods to you and your neighbors, or people outside of your community, if it's a particularly large warehouse and you live on like an interstate, are now going to be used as giant prisons to collect and store human beings, your neighbors, for the crime of being the wrong ethnic group. That's all it is. And we're seeing now what, the capitalism laid bare. We're seeing, I don't know if there's a better metaphor for the descent of capitalism into the inevitability of fascism than literally turning buildings used to store and distribute commodities to being used to store and distribute human beings. It's absurd to an extent. It's not surprising at all. This has been the goal of the U.S. for a long time, from mass murder of Hispanic people in the West. This is what a lot of the military was doing in the mid to late 1800s. After the Civil War, even prior to the Civil War. Prior to the Civil War, it was wars against Mexico and wars against the Hispanic people, ethnic cleansing. And Texas was taken from Mexico explicitly to preserve it as a slave territory. The Alamo was a battle between slavers and the anti-slavery forces of Mexico, who wanted to keep Texas free from slavery. That's what Santa Anna was doing. Santa Anna was up to a lot of other stuff too, but that's what Santa Anna was doing at the Alamo. And that's why all those guys who died had it coming and totally deserved it, because they were fighting to preserve slavery. And so the Mexican-American War, the United States invading Mexico, taking Mexican territory and cleansing the Mexicans from it. After the Civil War, the U.S. military and especially the Buffalo Soldiers were deployed to fight Native Americans and Mexicans in order to keep the United States territory sovereign or whatever. And, I bring up the Buffalo Soldiers in particular because it's an example of racialized comprador activity in which the United States uses ethnic minorities to war against other ethnic minorities in the service of white supremacy. You can buy into the white supremacist state and buy acceptance into the white supremacist state of the United States by oppressing other lesser desired, ethnic groups. We saw this, again, great example with the Buffalo Soldiers, great example with Irish American police. And, it goes on. It's why so many Native Americans and so many Hispanic people and black people are in the military, disproportionate to the demographics of the United States. Of course, poverty plays a huge role in that, and the military preys on the impoverished. That's a slightly different conversation, but not unrelated. So, we're seeing now, once again, this ethnic struggle that is wholly invented, of course, because, again, Mexican, or I'll say Hispanic people in general, but especially Mexican people, but Hispanic people in general and non-Hispanic people, white people in the United States, there is no conflict. There's no inherent difference. There's no inherent struggle between these two so-called ethnic groups. Of course, white isn't real, but that's, again, a conversation for a much longer time period than we have today. These differences are manufactured, and the struggle between Hispanic Americans and non-Hispanicans, but especially white Americans, is manufactured in order to maintain the white supremacist state, in order to maintain capitalism and fascism. Because as long as the workers, the proletarians, the people who make everything happen, remain divided, we're not going to be able to overthrow the bourgeoisie. The business leaders, these farmers that we just talked about, so-called farmers, who of course own the farms, want Hispanic workers because they can pay them little to nothing and abuse them and throw them out of the country by calling ICE on them as soon as they start to get a little too entitled, we'll say. Because obviously, the Hispanic workers on farms are entitled to everything that they produce. Man is entitled to the sweat of his own brow. But it all gets stolen by the capitalist so-called farmers who own rather than work for a living. But as long as we as proletarians, and especially white Americans, see Hispanic Americans, or Hispanics in general, non-Americans, as being different, as being inferior, we're not going to stand up for them when they get abused. And implicitly, that means that we are choosing to support their abuse. So that's what these warehouses being turned into concentration camps, and this is what the deportation, the ICE thing is all about. It's about keeping us divided, keeping us from backing up our brothers and sisters who are being oppressed, in order to, A, train us to be complicit, and to make it harder for us to resist when we are fractured and separated. Because these guys do not fear the government. They do not fear big government as much as they pretend to. What they fear is the workers. We're bigger than them. We're a lot more of us than there are of them. And we produce everything. The world cannot run without us, but it will run without them, and they know it. If you like the People's Report, check out our other shows at solidaritytv.org. Trump DOJ immediately stops enforcing prison rape protections for trans and intersex people, according to a leaked memo. December 6, 2025, via The Independent. The Department of Justice instructed prison auditors across the country to simply stop assessing whether facilities are violating laws designed to shield LGBT prisoners from sexual abuse. The U.S. Department of Justice will immediately stop enforcing a swath of federal regulations protecting trans and intersex prisoners from rape and sexual assault, according to leaked documents. In a memo obtained by the nonprofit news outlet Prism, DOJ official Tammy M. Greggs told prison auditors across the nation to immediately pause all compliance determinations for key safety rules concerning LGBTQ inmates and advised prisons to disregard them. Those rules include requiring trans and intersex prisoners to be allowed separate showers, banning body searches purely for the purpose of finding out what genitals they have, and requiring prison staff to consider their safety when assigning them to male or female wings. Some of the suspended clauses apply to all LGBT people, not just trans and intersex ones, and many apply to juvenile facilities as well as halfway houses, rehab centers, and mental health facilities. Gregg said these changes were intended as a stopgap solution while the Trump administration edits the regulations to comply with Donald Trump's January executive order declaring that trans people should always and only be treated as their birth sex under U.S. law. In the meantime, if actually implemented by auditors, her memo would effectively suspend numerous protections under the 2003 Prison Rape Elimination Act for trans and intersex people, whom the DOJ's own data suggests are at much higher risk of sexual violence in prison. These changes are a green light for predators to sexually assault incarcerated adults and children who are already disproportionately at risk, said Linda McFarlane, executive director of the nonprofit campaign group Just Detention, which trains prison staff on PREA compliance and has several certified auditors on staff. Jillian Brandstetter of the ACLU likewise said, "The only reason not to follow the Prison Rape Elimination Act is if you do not want to eliminate rape. PREA audits are difficult enough to secure with any impactful or transparent way. Telling auditors just to ignore the risks queer people face is an explicit endorsement of their abuse as you can get." Whether PREA auditors will actually comply remains unclear. Though trained and certified by the DOJ, they're not actually federal employees, and often work under contract for state inspection agencies. What this means in practice is unclear. PREA is still the law, Shana Kishnick, senior staff attorney with the ACLU's LGBTQ and HIV project, told PRISM. Standards that are in place are still the law, and so this is essentially a directive to disregard the law. The National Association of PREA Coordinators similarly told NPR that since the DOJ has not finalized any rule changes, Obama's PREA standards remain legally in force. It's an open secret that sexual violence is a key part of the prison experience, and more importantly, that it is a key part of the prison experience by design of the prison industrial complex. Everyone in America has heard and possibly even made jokes about men in particular being raped in prison. It is, that is the punchline of the classic line, "Don't drop the soap." It is a key part of incarceration for the humiliation and abuse of prisoners, and in turn to help keep people from wanting to protect prisoners and to help create this punishment deterrent to keep people from committing crimes. Which, again, as we previously discussed this evening, doesn't work. Punishment does not deter people from committing crimes. It deters them from getting caught. But, again, we just covered that. Sexual violence is, again, such a key and present part of imprisonment. It is a key part of the punishment of prison that it is so widely understood by the American public, even if we don't immediately recognize it, that it makes its way into vernacular, as just described. And this is not an exception when it comes to queer people in prison, especially trans inmates. If you are unfamiliar with this other term, V-coding, let me explain it to you. It is common practice in prisons, especially American prisons, to incarcerate trans women in men's prisons and specifically put them as a roommate to aggressive cis male prisoners in order to keep the violence down and to placate the aggressive cis male prisoner by giving them a target for sexual violence. I wish I were making this up. This is by design, a very central part of the prison experience for trans people. Let me read to you some statistics on this here. A 2021 California study found that 69% of trans women prisoners report being made to perform sexual acts, 58.5% reported being violently sexually assaulted, and 88% reported having been coerced into a marriage-like relationship. Effectively, the prisons themselves pimp out trans women to violent male prisoners as a reward and as I don't want to say coercive, but as an enticement for them to not cause problems for the prison staff. And so we see the already violent dehumanization of persons in prison being turned up to 11 for trans people. Like the article says, the only reason to not enforce these standards that are supposed to prevent rape and sexual assault of LGBTQ persons in prison is if you don't want to prevent rape and sexual assault. And of course, they don't want to. It's already part of the prison system. It's a key, integral part of the prison system to sexually abuse people, especially trans individuals. And they don't want to give that up, not just because of the so-called benefits that you get, but because they have no interest in protecting or even valuing trans individuals. To the present American government, but really to the American government this whole time, trans people are not real people. They view them as being all sorts of manner of things that I don't even need to repeat because you've heard it all before. And the government does not recognize trans people as being trans, but as being a performance of their preferred gender. So in order to deter trans people from living their lives honestly, they are now I don't want to say bribing, can't think of the right word. They are keeping them locked in the closet through the fear of sexual violence. And it is very important to point out that this does not just extend to standard adult prisons. This extends to halfway houses and juvenile facilities, where youth are not going to be protected or supervised, or even these facilities are even going to be checked up to make sure that they are not allowing children to be sexually abused. Some of the other details in the article is that it includes is giving trans people their private places to shower and bathe, etc. Giving them the choice of men's or women's prisons based on where they feel more comfortable. Checking in on children's facilities and making sure that non-straight children are not being perceived and treated as potential or active sexual predators based on their sexuality. So imagine a 15-year-old gay man, or gay boy, I guess he's 15, gets caught, I don't know, tagging and goes to juvie or something. That juvenile center would now not be stopped from automatically assuming that a gay person is going to be a sexual predator and abuse them as such, just as an example. Now, of course, it's also important to point out that presently, most of the people in charge of supervising this are not actually government employees or are not actually federal employees. And so they don't actually have to follow through on this new order at the moment. And until that is figured out, and in places where states have made this as part of their prison operations, it's still going to be in effect. So is this time for ultimate panic? No, it never is. But it is important to know that this does not change too much, both in good and bad. Sexual violence is already so common and supported and expected in prison, and no one's doing very few people are doing anything about it. Obviously, we have tons of prison abolitionist organizations and whatnot, not to besmirch them at all. And we already know that trans people, especially trans women, are being violently sexually abused in prisons by design, even with these standards in place. So are things going to get better for trans people presently? No. and we need to be aware of how bad it is presently and how much worse it can get. And we need to really hold these organizations and these prisons accountable and our public officials accountable and really take them to task over protecting our trans and otherwise LGBTQ neighbors. And that's not even discussing the fact that prisons are privatized and not under the direct control or operation of the government. This week's book recommendation is The Communist Manifesto, the one that started it all. It's an introduction to socialist thought intended for the uneducated proletariat. Paramount unveils Jared Kushner Middle East sovereign funds now are backers of now hostile Warner Brothers Discovery bid, December 8, 2025, via Deadline. Paramount's last and best offer for Warner Brothers Discovery, one that it took hostile today, includes funding from the Public Investment Fund of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Mod holding company PJSC from Abu Dhabi, Qatar Investment Authority of Qatar, and Affinity Partners, the investment fund of President Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Abu Dhabi-based Luna and Qatar's Sovereign Wealth Fund are both big investors in Affinity. The Kushner firm is also part of the group that's agreed to buy Electronic Arts for $55 billion. Paramount earlier Monday announced a hostile takeover offer for Warner Brothers Discovery, taking its arguments directly to shareholders after, it said, the company run by David Zaslav rebuffed its repeated overtures, 6 in total. Warner Brothers Discovery inked a deal instead to sell its studios and streaming assets to Netflix. Warner Brothers Discovery says it will carefully review and consider Paramount Skydance's offer, but the board is not modifying its recommendation with respect to the agreement with Netflix. Warner Brothers Discovery intends to advise its stockholders of the board's recommendation regarding Paramount Skydance's tender offer within 10 business days. Trump said last night that Netflix's streaming dominance, if combined with HBO Max, could be a problem, and that he would be involved in assessing any deal. The merger would likely go before the Department of Justice. A series of SEC filings today detailed the saga and revealed Paramount's Middle Eastern backers in the final bid submitted last week. In response to Warner Brothers Discovery concerns, Paramount said the groups agreed to forego any governance rights, including board representation, associated with their non-voting equity investments. Accordingly, the transaction will not be within CFIUS's jurisdiction, it said, referring to the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, an interagency body that reviews foreign investments for potential national security risks. China's Tencent, which was a part of a previous offer, was no longer a partner in the transaction in its latest iteration. Paramount addressed every single material issue that it received specific feedback on, despite never receiving any written response, on any of the transaction documents submitted, Paramount said, pressing its case directly with Warner Brothers Discovery shareholders. It's offering them $30 a share in cash to buy the entire company. They have until January 8th to take Paramount up on the offer, which may be extended. The total cash funding from Paramount's affiliates and partners, which also includes Redbird Capital, comes to $40.7 billion. The deal also includes debt financing arrangements with Bank of America, Citi, and Apollo Capital Management, and an aggregate principal amount of up to $54 billion. Paramount notes that the $40 billion is entirely backstopped by the Ellison Trust, meaning it could and would, if needed, cover all financial commitments. On one hand, I'm getting pretty tired of these mergers. And of course, like the article says, I don't remember if it was in the section that I read out loud, but these guys are looking to maximize value, maximize shareholder value, stockholder value. They're not looking to merge these companies for any positive reasons, right? Netflix isn't looking to buy out Warner Brothers Discovery because they think that they can do the next season of Game of Thrones better. Anyone could have made that last season better, but they're doing it to maximize shareholder value, and they're also doing it to reduce options for us, right? If the big complaint has been we all switch from cable to streaming, back when there's one or two platforms, everybody has their own streaming platform, and it kind of sucks, and so. The consolidation of these platforms also means that we're going to have fewer and fewer options, and that means that they can do more with that money. They can charge people more because people are going to be able to offer more of what people want, and they've already destroyed the television industry in its own way by doing things like eliminating residuals, which now makes acting in a TV show significantly less profitable for the actors themselves. It used to be that, for those who may be unaware, it used to be that when you were on a TV show, and every time that episode of that TV show aired, you got paid, whatever the agreement was. So, it might be, you did some Christmas special, so every year Seinfeld Christmas special airs or whatever, and so you were in it and you suddenly get $40 around Christmas. I don't know. Might not be anything significant to you. Other people have retired and they live off these residuals from reruns of popular TV shows. Come streaming networks do not pay residuals. So now, if you're an actor in a TV show, no matter how many people watch that show, no matter how often it airs, you don't get paid for that anymore. And that was a really good way for these companies to earn and keep money that is being made, of course, by the actors and by the crew and all that. Because it's not the producers who make the money. It's not the companies that make the money. It's not Warner Brothers Discovery that is making the money. It's Warner Brothers Discovery that is taking the profits from the people who actually made the movies, who made the TV shows, etc., etc. We kind of already understand this intuitively through our understanding of socialism and the way that capital works. And I've explained it on the show a number of times. But, the workers make the money, and then their excess value, so-called, the value that they create through this work, gets ripped from them and kept by the bourgeoisie, by the ruling class, by their higher-ups, by their bosses, who don't work to make that money. They own to make that money. So now these companies are owning to make even more money because they're not paying the workers as they used to, which is why streaming became so popular with everybody all the time, and now it's being shrunk back down to a couple of channels. Is this the worst thing to have ever happened? No. The reason is that as these things conglomerate, it's going to be easier and easier and easier for workers to seize the means of production, and for workers to take over these companies, or for them to be nationalized. I don't think Netflix is ever going to be nationalized, but the lessons hold true for other industries as well. It's certainly interesting that the Trump family has its hands in the pot, though, as do the UAE, which, interestingly enough, is not named in this article. The UAE is only named by its cities, Abu Dhabi, which is the capital of the UAE. And I find that interesting that this is a repeating pattern in many of these articles, that they do not mention that the United Arab Emirates has their hands in the pie, but rather that the city, Abu Dhabi based or Dubai based. Very, very, very interesting to note. What does it mean offhand? I'm not entirely sure. And I don't want to get conspiratorial about it at the moment. I'll give it some thought, though. I do not want corrupt capitalist hellholes like the UAE or Saudi Arabia, run by a king and a despot, to have control over not just entertainment, because that's whatever. The United States is a despotic capitalist hellscape itself anyway, right? So I guess adding the UAE and Saudi Arabia to the pie, or to the pot, to the kitchen, I don't know, if they're cooks in this situation. I don't know if that's really going to make it worse. But I don't want them involved. And I don't want the United States involved either, especially because these companies, these entertainment companies, often own news corporations. And so what happens when the news starts consolidating under one banner that is partially owned and operated by the Trumps, the Trump family, the Trump crime family, if you will? Very, very, I don't want to say scary. Things are scary enough as is, and honestly, is it really all that different from having a political dynasty type family? We'll see if it's a dynasty. A political rich boy family versus just a regular billionaire rich boy family. I don't know. But, these corrupt enterprises, whether it be Trump and the United States, or Saudi Arabia, or the UAE being involved in our daily, both entertainment and news, certainly does not bear well for any hope of receiving truth or morality, which is subjective anyway. But, we know, or should know, about the evils of the United States. The evils of Saudi Arabia and the UAE are a lot less familiar to the audience, unless you've been watching this show, in which case you probably know all about, or a bit about, the evil doings of the UAE. But they are war profiteers, mass murderers. See if this one sounds familiar. Guess which one of these three countries it is. Weapons dealing that sends weapons to foreign militias in order to create genocide conditions and mass murder in the Middle East and North Africa. Is it Saudi Arabia, the United States, or the UAE? It's all three. All three. UAE, of course, sponsoring genocide in Darfur and in Sudan in general. Saudi Arabia invading and continually trying and failing to occupy Yemen on behalf of international capital, and the United States, and it's everywhere all the time, all at once. And all three are partnering with the Trumps to conglomerate and monopolize entertainment and so-called news. Hey guys, remember the words of Chairman Mao: civilize the mind and make savage the body. If it makes sense for you, do what I did and shovel snow all day long. And for you lucky bastards who don't have snow, try upping your daily walk to a jog. Yellow line that divides Gaza under Trump plan is new border for Israel, says military chief, December 8, 2025, via The Guardian. Eyal Zamir said that Israel would hold on to its current positions, giving it control of more than half of the Gaza territory. The yellow line that divides Gaza under Donald Trump's ceasefire plan is a new border for Israel, the country's military chief told soldiers deployed in the territory. Chief of the General Staff, Eyal Zamir, said Israel would hold on to its current military positions. These give Israel control of more than half of Gaza, including most agricultural land and the border crossing with Egypt. The yellow line is a new border line, serving as a forward defensive line for our communities and a line of operational activity, Zamir said during a visit to meet Israeli reservists in northern Gaza, where he also visited the ruins of the Palestinian towns of Beit Hanun and Jabalia. We have operational control over extensive parts of the Gaza Strip, and we will remain on those defense lines, Zamir said, according to an English-language transcript of his remarks provided by a military spokesperson. Palestinians are forced out of this eastern portion of Gaza by Israeli attacks and evacuation orders. Almost all of the surviving population, over 2 million people, are now crowded into a narrow zone of coastal sand dunes that is smaller than Washington, D.C. Zamir's commitment to keep troops in Gaza appears to contradict the ceasefire agreement which it signed on October, which specifies that Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. Trump's 20-point plan commits the Israeli military to progressively hand over Palestinian territory to an international security force until they have withdrawn completely from Gaza, barring a small security perimeter by the border. The Israeli government declined to comment on whether Zamir's statement reflected official policy. An official said Israeli forces were deployed in Gaza in accordance with the ceasefire outline, and accused Hamas of violating the ceasefire. The ceasefire agreement links the departure of Israeli forces to the demilitarization of Hamas, without laying out a mechanism or time frame for that to happen. A UN resolution passed last month authorized the creation of an international security force, but no countries have committed troops to stand it up. Some have expressed interest in joining a peacekeeping force, but none want to risk their soldiers being ordered to fight Hamas, despite pressure from the Trump administration. The Israeli army has built new concrete outposts along the Yellow Line to fortify its positions and declared it a lethal boundary, even though it is not always clearly marked and a ceasefire is in place. Soldiers have repeatedly killed Palestinians they accuse of crossing it, including young children. Concrete bollards laid out to mark some stretches of the line have also been used to expand Israel's military occupation of Gaza. Satellite images show that some markers have been placed hundreds of meters beyond the boundary agreed on by ceasefire maps. The U.S. military has also been planning for the long-term partition of Gaza along the Yellow Line, and one U.S. official has described reunification as aspirational. Documents seen by The Guardian envisage the territory split into a green zone under Israeli and international military control, where reconstruction would start, and a red zone to be left indefinitely in ruins. Let's be honest, did anyone not see this coming? that the so-called yellow line, which is on paper only and in physical space completely amorphous at best, that this is going to be the new Israel border. No, anyone with sense knew that this is exactly what it was intended to do. It's a new wall for apartheid, and it's going to be used to concentrate the Palestinian people into smaller and smaller and smaller camps. So it's a new border fence. It's a new concentration camp fence that's just been shrinking the camps down, shrinking the reservation down. So of course, that's how the Palestinians live. They live in concentration camps and reservations. And they are, again, they do this for weapons and development testing for the United States or for the U.S. empire at large. And they do this for the Zionist project. But the ceasefire and the new line, Trump's so-called peace plan, is entirely bogus. And we know that this has been bogus since the start. International peacekeeping force to disarm Hamas instead of disarming the genocidaires. The international peacekeeping force that hasn't materialized and nobody wants to volunteer for. I find it interesting that this article says that they don't want to have to combat Hamas, and quite frankly, I wouldn't either. If I were seeing so-called one of the best armies in the world get constantly greased on the daily, I probably wouldn't want to fight those guys either. You have a guy running around in flip-flops, laying out tanks, 2 at once. I wouldn't want to fight that guy either. Luckily, I don't have to, and I'm not going to because I'm not a racist. Not a racist genocidaire who wants to mass murder people for the color of their skin and expel them from their indigenous homeland that they've lived for 5,000 plus years. I'm not that kind of person, so I'm not going to have to worry about that. Other people who would volunteer for the military-industrial complex in the international U.S. empire would have to worry about that. And trying to disarm the people who have repeatedly humiliated and embarrassed the Israeli military, which, again, has been billed as the army of the future, the most advanced military, is really competent fighting force that doesn't know combined arms tactics, does not know how to use its own armored divisions, does not know how to fight. And really, the only two things that they're good at is bombing from a distance and getting splattered by Hamas. The latter of which is a fantastic thing to see. So nobody wants to do that, which is why this international fighting force is not materialized. And the so-called ceasefire has simply not happened. And for the sake of clarity, whenever I refer to Hamas, generally speaking, I'm going to be referring to the Hamas-led coalition. And I know that Palestinian Islamic Jihad is not Hamas. I know that the Al-Qassam brigades is not Hamas, it's their armed wing. The PFLP, the DFLP, Lions Den, etc. Are not Hamas. I'm referring to them collectively as Hamas for the sake of ease, not to disparage or put down any of the groups, although I'm sure that they all appreciate us recognizing them all as collective brothers and sisters. So they have been the only ones adhering to the ceasefire. The Israelis have not. Israelis have been bombing, shooting, shelling, and murdering people. Just this past week, they saw 2 threats come too close to the yellow line. No, not crossing it, but too close to this amorphous line that is unmarked, and saw that they were too much of a threat and shot them dead, and they were children. I think just a few days ago, they shot a 3-year-old to death for the same reason. They came too close to the line. And this line is drawn conspicuously to include not just the Egyptian border, but most of the arable land. So now the Palestinian people living in the Gaza Strip are going to be extra reliant on imports because they're not going to be able to grow their own food or maintain food sovereignty in the way that they used to. And even then, it was a struggle. And all of their imports are going to be checked by Israel because they're going to have to come through Israel or the sea, which of course Israel doesn't allow them to do. All of their borders are occupied by Israel, even the ocean. So that's what it's looking at. This is what we're looking at in the future of Gaza. The question, oh, well, why don't the Egyptians just take them? Why don't the other Arab countries take them in? Why doesn't Egypt open the border? Gone. Egypt doesn't have control of the border anymore. The border is now maintained as it always was, but now in truth and undeniably by Israel. The area in which these people can live, again, it used to be around, I think, 2.2 million people living in Gaza in an area the size of Philadelphia, has now shrunk to what they say about the size of Washington, D.C., with about the same population, well, significantly reduced population, of course, due to the genocide. But even so, they're now being shrunk into a much smaller, much tighter place. And the vision being thrust upon them by the force of arms, by the U.S. empire, includes areas that they're not allowed to rebuild, and all of their arable land and all of their borders are now being controlled by their oppressor, Israel, the occupying colonial force that is committing genocide against the Palestinian people, at the behest of, and in the service of, the U.S. empire, which is not the puppet master necessarily, but the owner of Israel, the patron of Israel. Anything Israel does is done with the express or the implicit permission of the United States. Israel is an arm of the United States. It is their garrison state. It is America's little Ulster in the Middle East. And everything that they do is for the American imperial project. And that means that killing and genociding and ethnically cleansing and starving and brutalizing and torturing and imprisoning the Palestinian people is a crime committed by and for the United States. Hey guys, it'd mean a lot if you subscribe to our Patreon at solidaritytelevision.org. Another Trump Jr.-backed company received a massive Pentagon deal, December 9th, 2025, via Asia Times. One legal expert said the contract falls under the cloud of conflicts of interest we have seen throughout this administration. For the second time this year, a little-known company backed by Donald Trump Jr. has scored a major contract with the U.S. Department of Defense. The Financial Times reported that Vulcan Elements, a tiny startup of 30 employees that specializes in producing rare earth magnets used in drones, radars, and other pieces of military equipment, scored a $620 million loan from the Pentagon as part of a $1.4 billion deal to increase the supply of magnets for industries alongside partner ReElement Technologies. Vulcan has received funding from 1789 Capital, a venture capital firm founded by pro-Trump donors in 2023 that brought Trump Jr. in as a partner last year. According to the FT's analysis, at least 4 of 1789's portfolio companies have won contracts from the Trump administration this year, amounting to more than $735 million. Revelations about the Vulcan Elements contract come just weeks after the Florida-based drone startup Unusual Machines, in which Trump Jr. has held a $4 million stake, received a contract from the U.S. Army to manufacture 3,500 drone motors. Additionally, reported in the FT, the Army indicated that it planned to order an additional 200,000 components from the Trump Jr.-backed firm next year. As Popular Information reported earlier this year, Unusual Machines first brought Donald Trump Jr. on as an advisor just weeks after his father won the 2024 presidential election, even though he had no notable experience with drones or military contracting. A Popular Information article published last week reported that both Vulcan CEO John Maslin and Unusual Machines CEO Alan Evans said that Trump Jr. played no role in securing government contracts. However, the Popular Information report flagged statements by Trump Jr. made earlier this year about helping to screen candidates for key positions in the Pentagon who would buy drones. In September, Trump Jr. said on his podcast that he looked for candidates who wanted to spend more on drones, alleging the military is better served with a drone that costs a tiny fraction of that of a plane. Kedrick Payne, general counsel at the Campaign Legal Center, told the Financial Times that the government deals scored by Trump Jr.-backed companies look ethically dubious, even if the president's son didn't directly use his influence to procure them. Presidents are expected to avoid even the appearance that they are using their office to financially benefit themselves or their family, he said. While we do not know for certain if or how the president may have influenced this loan, It falls under the cloud of conflicts of interest we have seen throughout this administration. I'm pretty sure I remember just a few years ago, and probably up to a couple weeks ago, the MAGA movement at large looking to effectively hang Hunter Biden for effectively, or I should say for supposedly, the exact same kind of crimes and corruption that Donnie Jr. is now proven to be involved in. Or I guess maybe not proven, but is overwhelmingly seen to be involved in. And that's not to defend or justify whatever Hunter Biden was up to in Ukraine and whatever, or the Bidens in large. I mean, we all know Joe Biden is a war criminal, a genocidaire, a racist to the highest degree, and a violent criminal. And he should be hanged for crimes against humanity. But the assumption that this is now okay when Don Jr., is involved in corruption and profiteering is, well, I mean, it just really shows that the entire MAGA movement is not about laws, it's not about rules, it's not about what is right, and we all knew that, but it's about what their team can get away with. And war profiteering, just tack that on. War profiteering is nothing new to the United States, nothing new to U.S. dynasties. Just look at Bush and look at his vice president, Dick Cheney, profiteering off the war in Iraq. And war profiteering is so integral to the United States that it basically is the United States, the business of war, and the military-industrial complex, etc., etc., etc. And now, of course, the Trumps are involved now directly in profiting from war and the manufacturing of war equipment, drones in particular. Drone warfare is, I mean, it's as upsetting as any other war material, but with its relatively new deployment, it's distressing, of course, to watch or to see, and I have to imagine way more distressing to be involved in. And I don't like the way that the U.S. military is investing in drones, especially because so many of them are being purchased by so-called law enforcement, whether it be the NYPD, the LAPD, Chicago Police, or ICE and DHS, etc., etc., etc. And now, quite possibly, every time DHS, which has an extremely inflated budget, purchases drones, the Trump family gets effectively a kickback. So, it's really just financial incentive for them to continue to profligate this war against Hispanics and immigrants and anyone else that they find undesirable in the United States, which we'll be talking a little bit more about shortly. So, and this is one of the inherent corruptions of war profiteering, and why I think technically speaking it's considered a crime, but of course never prosecuted in the United States when it's an American company that does it, is that if it gives the financial incentive, the profit motive, to continue war and violence. And rather than keeping it as a emergency solution, what do they call it? Politics through other means or whatever. It is the MO of the general orders of the day. And that is exactly what it is under the Trump administration and, truth be told, under all the other previous administrations, Democrat or Republican, where war is too profitable to stop. And that is why we have to continually create forever wars, constantly prop up other wars across the world in order to make imperial super profits off the mass murder and destruction and slaughter of innocents across the globe. And perhaps more importantly than the slaughter of innocents, slaughter of our brothers and sisters, because that's who these people are. It's not the billionaires in foreign countries who are getting killed by U.S. military equipment. It's the working people. It's people just like you and I who do same kind of stuff you and I do, but in a different country, and they get killed for it. You know, they're living their own lives in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Somalia, in Yemen, in Sudan, in Venezuela, in Colombia, etc., etc., etc. I could go on and on and on about all the places that we've brutalized or preparing to brutalize for the sake of imperial profits. And, you know, now those imperial profits are not just being distributed to our, what do they call it? To our billionaires and our ruling class, and to our, honestly, our proletarians involved in workers' unions and such at labor aristocracy. That's the term I was looking for. Labor unions involved in shipping and distributing and manufacturing war equipment, but to literally the ruling house, if you will, the Trump administration. And so, you know, now, whether or not one can conclusively prove that Don Jr. is involved in these companies because his dad's going to get him a paycheck, or if these companies are getting these contracts because Don Jr. is involved in them, probably very difficult to prove. Trump administration has been pretty bad at actually recording stuff, the bad stuff that they do overtly, but we'll probably never be able to conclusively prove it. But the evidence is all there, and we know that the Trump administration is personally, directly profiting from the continuation of war and the production and use of wartime equipment. Another way you can support us is by following us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and anywhere podcasts are shared. FBI making a list of American extremists, leaked memo reveals. December 6, 2025, via Ken Klippenstein. Attorney General Pam Bondi is ordering the FBI to compile a list of groups or entities engaging in acts that may constitute domestic terrorism, according to a Justice Department memo published here exclusively. The target is those expressing opposition to law and immigration enforcement, extreme views in favor of mass migration and open borders, adherence to radical gender ideology, as well as anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, and anti-Christianity. That language echoes the so-called indicators of terrorism identified by President Trump's Directive National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, or NSPM 7, which the memo says it's intended to implement. Where NSPM 7 was a declaration of war on just about anyone who isn't MAGA, this is the war plan for how the government will wage it on a tactical level. In addition to compiling a list of undesirables, Bondi directs the FBI to enhance capabilities and publicity of its tip line in order to more aggressively solicit tips from the American public on, well, other Americans. To that end, Bondi also directs the FBI to establish a cash reward system for information leading to identification and arrest of leadership figures within these purported domestic terrorist organizations. The memo later instructs the FBI to establish cooperators to provide information and eventually testify against other members of the groups. The payouts don't just end there. Justice Department grants are now to prioritize funding to programs for state and local law enforcement to go after domestic terrorism. In a section titled Defining the Domestic Terrorism Threat, the memo cites extreme viewpoints on immigration, radical gender ideology, and anti-American sentiment, indicators that federal law enforcement are instructed to refer to FBI Joint Terrorism Task Forces, JTTFs. Those JTTFs are then instructed to use all available investigative tools in order to map the full network of culpable actors involved in both inside and outside the United States. The memo also directs the FBI and JTTFs to retroactively investigate incidents going back 5 years, authorizing the JTTFs in particular to use everything at their disposal to do so. Upon receipt of these referrals, JTTFs shall use all available investigative tools, consistent with law enforcement internal policies and statutory obligations, to map the full network of culpable actors involved in the referred conduct inside and outside the United States, the memo says. For months, major media outlets have largely blown off the story of NSPM 7, thinking it was all just Trump bluster and too crazy to be serious. But a memo like this one shows you that the administration is absolutely taking this seriously, even if the media are not, and is actively working to operationalize NSMP 7. NSPM 7 was signed in September largely in response to the murder of Charlie Kirk, a 9/11 type event for the Trump administration. Kirk's assassination is referenced explicitly in the Justice Department memo. As anyone who lived through 9/11 can remember, the government doesn't always think rationally in moments like those, to say the least. So here we are with a new war on terrorism, only this time, millions of Americans like you and I could be the target. One of the details in this memo that wasn't mentioned in the article is that they are looking to go after these groups also, or organized groups for tax crimes. In other words, if you are an organization that promotes or is involved in, the various terrorist ideologies, or terrorist-linked ideologies, I guess, like extremism on gender, or anti-Christian, or anti-capitalist, or any of the other things that they mentioned. You might be investigated for, taxes, and then if you're an organization with a nonprofit status, you might lose the nonprofit status and that kind of thing. So I already know and have seen that various organizations are starting to crack down on the free speech of its members in order to preserve their nonprofit status and to avoid being listed as a terror group or terror-affiliated group or whatever. And, losing their ability to, say, serve their community because they'll no longer be tax exempt. So they're coming after people not just ideologically, but also financially. And really, this is no surprise. And really, this is nothing new either. Classic COINTELPRO stuff. I mean, the paid informants asking people to snitch on each other for some cash. This is classic 60s stuff. And before anyone gets any ideas about snitching on anyone for cash, just remember that the woman who allegedly snitched on Luigi Mangione got nothing at all, for reportedly calling him out to law enforcement. She did not get the money for that. Of course, Luigi didn't do it anyway. But so don't snitch, because snitches get stitches and wind up in ditches, and they don't get paid. The government's going to do everything they can to not pay you, because, again, capitalist elite are already making sure that you don't get paid in general. So don't snitch on your comrades or your neighbors. And really, this is designed not just to allow the government crackdown on free speech activities and on political dissent, but also to create distrust amongst neighbors and to help people stay disorganized by being too scared to either get organized or being scared of people who are already organizing with them, that they're going to sell them out. Again, classic 60s, 70s stuff. That's classic 1930s stuff. And calling the feds on your neighbors this is exactly what ICE is up to now. And this is kind of how the United States ran Afghanistan. Hotlines and tips by disgruntled people trying to call in government goons on their rivals, should we say. But if you're already organized, this is no reason to back down. First of all, what is extremism on gender? I'll tell you this. I think that it's pretty extreme to disregard all reality in order to try to argue that there are only two genders, male and female, and that cisgender heteronormativity is the only way to exist. That's pretty extreme. It goes against all reality. What is extremism on immigration? I think purging all non-white minorities from the United States is pretty extreme. So are we going to be cracking down on the Klan? I don't think so. Government's never done it, so they're not going to start now. What is anti-capitalist? To what extent is it joining a union? Is that anti-capitalist? Or is it being a radical communist? What is anti-Christian? Is it saying we have to destroy Christians? Or is it being non-Christian? Is being Muslim anti-Christian? Is being an atheist anti-Christian? What do these terms actually mean? And of course it means whatever the state needs it to mean in order to crack down on you. So if they're going to manipulate the rules to get you, you might as well not bother playing by the rules, right? So I'm not going to be stopping my work. You shouldn't be stopping your work. And if we're being honest, they can't get all of us. Simply can't. There's too many people for them to crack down on everyone. So obviously they're going to go after the most vulnerable people first. And this is why it's more important than ever to be organized and to be a part of your community, because vulnerable people are the ones who are left out in the cold. And so it's your job and my job to bring them in and then protect each other, because we keep us safe, not the law, not the government, not the Democrats, not the liberals, and certainly, of course, not the conservatives or the Republicans. So it's us, the working class, who has to organize to protect the working class. So now is the best time to speak up. Now, if more and more voices are going quiet out of fear of being considered domestic terrorism for whatever bullshit the government wants to claim it as, it's going to be easier to grab those people. But if you are familiar with the story of Spartacus, we're all Spartacus, man. All of us have to stand up and do the right thing, speak out, get into some good trouble. They can't get everyone. And they're going to try, of course, and it's going to suck for a lot of us. But can't get everyone. And so now's the time to make sure that they can get as few people as possible by creating as few targets singled out as possible. And that's all there is to it. Australia passes social media ban for children under 16, November 29, 2025, via Reuters. Australia approved on Thursday a social media ban for children aged under 16 after an emotive debate that has gripped the nation, setting a benchmark for jurisdictions around the world with one of the toughest regulations targeting big tech. The law forces tech giants, from Instagram and Facebook owner Meta to TikTok, to stop minors from logging in or face fines of up to 49.5 million Australian dollars, or $32 million US dollars. A trial of methods to enforce it will start in January, with the ban to take effect in a year. Social media minimum age bill sets Australia up as a test case for a growing number of governments which have legislated, or said they plan to legislate, an age restriction on social media amid concern about its mental health impact on young people. Countries including France and some US states have passed laws to restrict access for minors without a parent's permission, but the Australian ban is absolute. A full under 14 ban in Florida is being challenged in court on free speech grounds. Getting the law passed after a marathon last day of Australia's parliamentary year marks a political win for centre-left Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, who goes to an election in 2025 amid sagging opinion polls. The ban faced opposition from privacy advocates and some child rights groups, but 77% of the population wanted it, according to latest polls. Against a backdrop of a parliamentary inquiry through 2024 which heard evidence from parents of children who have self-harmed due to social media bullying, domestic media backed the ban led by Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, the country's biggest newspaper publisher, with a campaign called Let Them Be Kids. The ban could, however, strain Australia's relationship with key ally the United States, where Twitter owner Elon Musk, a central figure in the administration of President-elect Donald Trump, said in a post this month that it seemed a backdoor way to control access to the internet by all Australians. It also builds an existing mood of antagonism between Australia and mostly US-domiciled tech giants. Australia was the first country to make social media platforms pay media outlets royalties for sharing their content, and now plans to threaten them with fines for failing to stamp out scams. Some youth advocacy groups and academics have warned the ban could shut off the most vulnerable young people, including LGBTQIA and migrant teenagers, from support networks. The Australian Human Rights Commission said the law may infringe human rights of young people by interfering with their ability to participate in society. Privacy advocates, meanwhile, warned the law could lead to a heightened collection of personal data, clearing the path for digital identification-based state surveillance. A last-minute change to the bill specified that platforms must offer an alternative to making users upload identification documents. Off the rip, I do admit that my first reaction to the idea of prohibiting children from engaging in social media is a positive one. the idea of exposing kids to what there is online is, probably a lot of people should not be exposed to what they are exposed to online. And we understand that to a large extent, children may not have the experience or support necessary to enable them to make good decisions on, what they're engaging with or what they're doing online. And as someone who's way too online myself, engaging with very young people who perhaps don't have the most thorough education can be a frustrating experience. But reactionary sentiment aside, did anyone ask the kids? And that's what I would like to know, because this affects them the most. And to be honest, children simply do not have rights. Children are more or less property of their parents or whoever the state has appointed as a guardian, or perhaps property of the state itself. And stripping children of further rights and of potential for community is not something I see as being progressive or helpful. Now, the article mentions that particularly people or children who are part of the LGBTQ community may lose or are going to lose access to that larger community. And if we lived in a society in which the children of the world, children of specifically the Western world, had actual community in their lives, maybe this wouldn't be as big of a problem. But over time, actual community and community spaces have been being stripped away, dissolved, privatized, and profitized in order to extract as much wealth from families as possible at the expense of these children. There are very few places for children in the world, let alone, community spaces. People complain about children all the time. They don't like to see them out in public. Kids playing outside get the cops called on them. Kids can't even play with toy guns without getting shot. Well, unless you're white, of course. And, parks are being closed or being regulated. It's unsafe for people to go out if they live in suburban developments where they're going to get hit by an SUV. Youth activities, youth sports leagues and whatever are being dissolved. Community centers are going away. And generally there's been an uptick in fear of community, of this fear of strangers. And we all know that almost any child that's going to be abused gets abused by someone that they know intimately. And I guess maybe that's an argument in and of itself for not getting to know people intimately, whatever. So, protecting them from the scary stranger is not really protecting them at all, because chances are it's going to be someone in their house, or someone that they already know, and that's not going to be a stranger. And it generally goes for most victims of abuse. It's almost never someone strange off the street. But so we don't let kids go out anymore. There aren't places for kids to go. And when they are, it's either very limited or underinvested. It's maybe your local park is just an open field. You don't have soccer nets or whatever, basketball courts, etc., etc. So stripping away the idea of community from people has put so many of us, adult or child, into our little bubbles, indoors, online, in our cars, etc. And then you remove that socialization that you can get online from the mix too, and you have kids who don't engage with other people. And outside of, maybe school and sometimes church, but most kids aren't going to church either. So, and I'm not saying whether or not they should, just that has been a traditional place of community throughout history, and is no longer one. So, what is going to be the end result of us constantly making decisions for children? And if we're going to talk about the negative side effects of social media, the bullying, the harassment, the sexual exploitation, etc., all of those apply to adults. Now, we often assume that adults can handle it better, but really, can they? I'm unconvinced that adults have been all that good at handling the peer pressure, if you will, from online. Hell, the MAGA movement is kind of built on it, of this mass socialization and pressures and whatnot. And how many grown-ups get sexually trafficked by internet users. So it's not just, this isn't stuff that just happens to kids, and I'm not even sure it's more likely to happen to kids. Probably not, because most people online are adults anyway. So just stripping away the rights and the ability for children to experience community, make decisions for themselves, etc., I'm not sure that this is a step in the right direction. Furthermore, how much of this is going to be used to rip data from kids who are, again, particularly vulnerable and have no rights? And corporations are going to use it to profit. And so I appreciate that at the very least, Australia decided that kids have to have an alternative to, government documents to prove that they are of age or whatever. But, is everybody going to follow that example? I don't know. I honestly don't expect it. And even those that do, how effective is that going to be? How much data is still going to be collected and leaked when inevitably there is a data breach? So, how safe is this keeping children anyway? I'm uncertain. And really, for a group of people that have no rights and are constantly denied self-actualization and self-identity, personhood in general, is keeping them, is an adult telling them you're not allowed to go online actually helpful? And not to mention, is making that a law actually going to do anything? How many people, went on to Lego.com without asking your parents' permission, as the commercial tells you to? Everybody. How many people accessed things that were supposed to be for people older than them before they came of age? Everybody. How are these companies really going to be able to determine it? And, if you have to provide some sort of documentation that you're old enough, that's just private corporations gobbling up everybody's documentation. So, it doesn't seem to me to be like a positive step, although it feels good for the public. Sure, 77% of Australians polled said that they want kids to not be online out of fears of bullying or whatever. And again, I appreciate the sentiment, but as these children's rights advocacy groups say, and as these privacy advocacy groups point out, what is this really doing? Is this actually beneficial to children? I don't think so. And I would love to hear what children and young people actually think about these rules. And I encourage them to take a minute and sit back and, rather than, oh my God, I'm going to lose TikTok, I'm going to lose Instagram or whatever, think about what it might actually mean, what it might actually cost, and then come back and tell us whether or not you think it is actually good for children to be banned from social media by the government and have their identities checked by private corporations. Hey comrades, thanks for joining us for this week's episode of The People's Report. Don't forget to subscribe at solidaritytelevision.org. Organizing the working classes of the world in solidarity forever.